So this week I want to deal with the readings fairly closely and try and relate what we're doing to everything we've done so far. It may not be terribly clear when you look at this week's readings that they are talking, without being explicit about the fact, they're talking about everything we've talked about so far, with the possible exception of dualism. They are talking about behaviorism and functionalism and identity theory as theories of mind. We've moved past the section that's explicitly about the nature of mind, and now we're talking about mental content, the things in our head that represent things in the world. But because one of the main features of mind is its ability to represent things, we're still talking about the nature of mind. We're just focused much more narrowly. And so last week, and even more so this week, our concern is, where does meaning come from? The things in our head, our experiences, our propositional attitudes, the intentional aspects of our thought mean things. And the question is, where does that meaning come from? So the readings this week, Dredske explicitly says he's concerned with giving a natural account of meaning, naturalizing meaning. What does that mean? Well, we want to give an account of meaning that does not appeal to anything that science cannot account for. So we're not going to allow to anything spooky, which might occur in Fodor's account of where semantics, the meaning of the reference, come from. We're not going to allow appeal to God because science doesn't study God. So we're going to investigate how our mental content means anything, and we're not going to say, well, we have the ability to give mental content meaning because God gave us that ability. That's a non-natural account of the origin of meaning. So one thing that I did not talk about that was in last week's readings, well, a number of times it was mentioned the idea of a homunculus. A homunculus is a little person. And so I'm going to modify the wonderful drawing from my fiancée again this week. So a homunculus is a little person, and one way we could account for meaning, this is F, a thing in the world. This is R, a representation in our head. And as of right now, we're being rather non-committal about the ontological status of R, of what our representations are. Are they pictures? Are they words? Are they neural structures under a certain organization with certain firings, etc.? Non-committal, for the most part right now, about what the representational form is. Something in our head represents something in the world, or something in our body, or something in our minds, depending on our background theory. There are things in our thoughts that represent things in the world. This is our R, the thing in the world is our F, this being a proxy, a variable for whatever the thing in the world is. F is the referent of R. R gets its sense from the semantics. Syntax has to do with the structure, the rules of structure for whatever these representations are. Symbols, letters, pictures, neural processes. But we have to get from the rules of structure to a semantics, some sort of meaning. And Fodor said, well, there's a language of thought. Let's say there are semantic rules, syntactic rules about what symbols are allowed. That being a circle, a triangle, and an X, even though that's hard to see. We can't say, and this is the Cartesian stance. Remember when Ryle was concerned with getting rid of the ghost in the machine? The ghost in the machine is a little person inside our head or inside our mind that's doing the seeing, the interpreting, the understanding. And so it can't be our theory that there are certain symbols, be they letters, sounds, pictures, or neuron conditions, that are then seen by something in our mind and interpreted by our mind. This is to posit a homunculus, a little person in our head. And this would be non-natural. All it does is push the problem back. it's no explanation at all. It's like Descartes' move when faced with the mind-body interaction problem to say, well, the mind and body interact at the pineal gland. That doesn't explain anything. It doesn't get rid of the problem. It only locates the problem. It pushes the explanation back. If we were to say that there is a homunculus, a little person in our head that interprets the symbols that are our representation of the world, then all we've done is push the problem of meaning back to the little person. Now, even Descartes, I think, is not all that literal about there being a little person in our head. But the homunculus can arise in a less literal fashion. So Fodor says that semantics, meaning, comes entirely from the syntax. And maybe we could give a theory of how that occurs, but it seems like he's just stating that to be the case, and it's not clear that we can get meaning from syntax alone. The rules of syntax seem to be one set of rules. The rules of semantics seem to be another set of rules. We need that second set of rules. It doesn't seem that it can be exhausted. That second set of rules can be exhausted. The rules for meaning can be exhausted by just the rules of structure of the language. Right? So I'm going to say a little more about syntax and semantics, then I'll come back and talk about the homunculus for Fodor. But Fodor says, well, look, we have rules of syntax in the language of thought. Now, this is an X. That is a symbol in the English language. And again, we're talking about English language here as a natural language, as an analog to whatever the system of representation in our mental system is. X, we recognize this syntactically. This has rules of syntax. This check. This counts as a valid symbol in the natural language of English. There are syntactical truths of this. This symbol is not valid as a syntactical symbol in the natural language of English. There are no syntactical truths about this. This is also syntactically a part of the natural language English, but there's also semantic truths about this. When you see this, you recognize this as a capital I. Check. Syntactically, that's a part of the natural language of English. Semantically, we could also say things true of this. Say, this either begins a word that begins a sentence in English, that's being a syntactical truth, or this is an individual speaking of themselves. That's a semantic truth about that. Now the question is whether we can get to a semantics, rules of meaning, and all of our rules of meaning only from rules of syntax. Fodor says that we can. It seems that that's a bit spooky. Maybe we can't really do that. We can't just take his word for it. He's going to have to deliver a theory that shows how we can get semantics from syntax without there being something like a homunculus. If he just says, without explaining, that there are semantics that are entirely exhausted through the syntax, he's delivered a homunculus without explicitly talking about a little man in the head. He did it by not delivering that theory of how we get semantics from syntax. And so the first reading this week, Dretsky, in wanting to give a naturalized account, an account of where meaning comes from without appeal to anything spooky, whether that be a man in the head, whether that be God delivering us the ability to give our representations meaning, or whether that be some theory that's not cashed out, this says that we can get semantics from syntax alone. And so he says, well, there are accounts of natural meaning. Things in the world just have meaning, completely divorced from what we think about them. They would have those meanings even if we did not exist. I have a very difficult time understanding this. I have no idea what natural meaning could be. This is parasitic for those of you who have a fetish for what I actually believe, but don't make too much of my actual beliefs. I have a hard time understanding what natural kinds could be as they're usually presented. And so I have a very hard time understanding what natural meaning could be. That is, things in the world mean something without humans to impart that meaning on them. Those things would have a meaning even if there were no humans, even if there were no mental beings, if we include, say, dogs there. Dresky wants to give a naturalized account of meaning. He says there are accounts of natural meaning. Could we give an account of propositional attitudes, mental content, how we deliver meaning to our representations by appeal to natural meaning? The fact that I have a hard time understanding natural meaning ends up not being a big deal because he doesn't think that natural meaning can fully account for the meaning we give our representations. Part of his reason for this is he doesn't think that natural meaning can account for misrepresentation. And so what I'm going to do here is try and unpack what he does there, put it in other terms. If the F in the world is a coiled tube that is cool, and you touch that, then you have an R. The R says something. That is, the representation in your head has certain properties of meaning. That might be the meaning that this thing is cool. I'm touching an F. The F is cool. That's content in the R. If I then have a coil that is warm, and you touch that thing, the R in your head, among other things, might say, I'm touching an F, this F is warm. So far, so good. There have been no problems. The problem with misrepresentation is that there seem to be times in which we have a belief with propositional content could be expressed in a sentence, and that sentence is false. We misrepresent the world. We need to be able to account for how we misrepresent the world, not just how we get it right. If there were natural meaning and we could pick up on the natural meaning, that might account for how we get it right. Dresky says it doesn't account for how we get it wrong. And so an example, if I then coil together the warm and the cool coils, and you touch these coils together at once, a sort of quirk of our physiology is now you experience this F, these two coils together, as hot, like dangerously hot. You pull your hand back. The R means something like hot. But this coil is cool, this coil is warm. Together we experience them as hot. This is a case of misrepresentation. We're imparting some meaning by way of representing the F, the coils, and that meaning is not true. We're just wrong that the thing in the world is hot. And then so there's a question of, well, was the R, the representation in our head, was it that there's a thing in the world, an F, these coils, and that is hot? Or was it danger? These being parts of the representation. The representation has lots of meanings there, but part of the meaning would be that it is hot, that it is dangerous, or that it is C fibers firing. What is the content of R? Which of these goes into the content of R? This matters because if we say that the representation says the thing in the world that I'm touching is hot, then I've misrepresented it. If I say that the R's content is that the thing is dangerous, again, I've misrepresented it. If I say that the R's content is that there are C fibers firing, then I don't seem to have misrepresented it. But the problem here is that these moves, how we define the R, essentially has just moved the R from there to here. That is how I'm describing the meaning of that R here. In the diagram, the R here, I'm determining by proxy, externally, as a homunculus, I made myself a homunculus by defining the R in a way that allowed for misrepresentation or didn't. This is a concern. We might think that there's natural meaning to heat. We might think that there's natural meaning to danger. I don't know how that would be. But it certainly seems that the C fiber firing case is not a case of natural meaning. Dresky goes through this and says, well, even if we think there was natural meaning does not explain how we could misrepresent the world. Natural meaning can never misrepresent. If there is a natural meaning to C fibers firing, a representation based on C fibers firing that said, I'm experiencing something that seems dangerous, well, then the mental content is accurate. I was experiencing something that seemed dangerous, but if I describe that mental content as saying that there is something dangerous, not just that I'm perceiving something to be dangerous, now there's not misrepresentation. So how we cash out this R, this representation in our head, when looking at this example, impacts whether or not we seem to be able to account for the misrepresentation. Whatever the case, the natural meaning, appeal to natural meanings, if there are such things as natural meanings, do not allow us to account for the error. And so he goes on to say, well, what we need is to separate out natural meaning from functional meaning. Natural meanings, or at least if we have a representation based on natural meaning, we acquire that functionally. But then he talks about functional meaning to be non-natural, functionally acquired meaning. And so he says that we can't account for misrepresentation, but in order to do it, we have to talk about functionally acquired non-natural meaning. Functionally acquired natural meaning will not do the job. All the meanings, though he doesn't explicitly say this, even the natural meaning is functionally acquired because we're not born with that knowledge. And even if we were, it would be historically, evolutionarily, functionally acquired. And all this talk of function, in the second reading by Cummings, I think, is made clear that functional account of meaning is parasitic on a functional account of mind. A number of you seem to be fond of a functional account of mind. Functionalist account of mind was put in place to solve two problems with identity theory. One, the disjunction problem. It seems that mental states are multiply realizable by physical states. Functionalism can account for this. Identity theory has to allow this. That might be a problem if we think that we cannot form nomological generalizations on the basis of a disjunction. Second problem that functionalism was supposed to solve that was facing identity theory was account for qualitative states, how qualitative states, mental states, and their qualitative properties could be causal. Functionalism stepped in to try and solve this. If we adopt a functionalist account of the nature of the mind, it seems that we're committed to a functionalist account of mental content, how meaning arises. And so Dresky says, well, look, we can give a functionalist account, and this is a behaviorist account he ends up giving. Functionalism is consistent with behaviorism as a different ontology, but there aren't obvious inconsistencies in, say, the way we process learning and acquire mental concepts. And so then he starts with lots of variables. Things start to get complicated, and I'm going to try and make it less complicated here. So if we take our F and now make it something specific in the world, this F is now going to be some sort of scary predator. We can give it stripes, right? This thing has certain properties that we can pick up on. Scary predator in the world. There is an F out there. And now, this F has certain properties, say its morphological properties. F1, it's a set of properties in the world. F1, it has stripes, it has big teeth, it has a scary eye, a horn or an ear, or whatever that is. There are other features of it. F2 being a sound it makes, it goes rar. We have a representation in our head of a thing in the world. There is an F in the world. And there's a process here, right? So F2, well first, F1, here, I pick up on certain features of F1. Those features lead to S1, a set of stimulations in my head, or rather in my eye. S1, my eye is stimulated. My eye picks up on certain morphological characteristics. F2, a sound, RAR, different stimulus. S2, I hear, RAR. Stimulus 2, stimulus 1, I see a toothy, horned, striped thing in the world. Each of these leads to some internal state, could be the same internal state. I'm going to make it two different internal states. Internal state 1, that would be some state in my brain or in my mind. That these could be mediated processes. If we have, depending on the theory of mind we have, there might be other steps here. It seems clear from science, I hear something in the world, leads to a stimulation in my ear, leads to a change in my brain, an internal state I1, which might then cause some change in my mind if we have some sort of a dualist theory. S2 leads to, this is going to be internal state 2. S1 leads to internal state 1, these being, let's say, for now, different neuronal states. Certain sections of my brain are firing, certain neurons are firing, they're firing at a certain rate, and so on. These internal states then cause my representation R. Here's my claims at this point. F has certain properties. Morphological properties F1. They cause stimulation, S1, in my eye. I pick up on these morphological properties. That causes a change in my brain state. I1 leads somehow to a representation R of F, the thing in the world. Or F has certain sound properties. It goes RAR. I pick up on that. The F2, the sound, stimulates my ear. S2 leads to an internal state, I2, which leads to a representation R of F. And now we're not exactly saying anything about how we acquire meaning, how R comes to mean there is an F there. Rather, right now, we want to account for how we could get it wrong, how we could be wrong that there is an F out there. And the move that Dretske makes is to say that, well, we could imagine, whether right or not, that all of this is natural meaning. Maybe this is not all natural meaning. But we could talk about cases that are clearly not natural meaning, that are functionally derived meanings through learning. And so he makes a move to talk about conditioning. He talks about there was S1. Now we're going to talk about CS1, conditioned stimuli 1. And so let's imagine famous case of little Albert, the behaviorist Watson, worked with Skinner, the two main behaviorists, and Watson did an experiment, a rather unethical experiment. He was working in a hospital. There was a nurse there, and they used the nurse's young child, baby, for experiments in conditioning. One thing they did was they got a fluffy rabbit, and children are naturally afraid of loud sounds, things like roar. F2, loud sound, rar, but in this case of little Albert, the name of the child, they presented a fluffy bunny, something that children are naturally drawn to, and every time the child reached for the fluffy bunny, they put off an air horn, a very loud horn, right behind the kid's head. The horn is F2, a loud honk, say, every time the kid reached for the fluffy bunny. The fluffy bunny is now our F, but it has different properties, say functional, morphological properties, F3. What we've done is every time we have F3, something shaped like a fluffy bunny, we've paired it with F2, a loud, scary sound. This led, previously, our morphological properties led to S1, certain stimulation of us. But now it leads to a different stimulation, morphological properties of a bunny paired with scary sound. And what they ended up doing in little Albert, every time Albert would reach for the bunny, loud sound, Albert would pull back his hand, start crying. What they did was condition a fear response in little Albert by pairing the sound, the scary sound, with the attractive fluffy bunny. Later you take out F2 and you have that the morphological properties of the fluffy bunny, the way it's shaped, the way it looks, leads to a conditioned stimulus that leads to a fear response. This would lead to some sort of an internal state, I3, which would lead to what? It would lead to a representation of a bunny as scary, possibly. This would then lead to output. The output would be pulling back your hand, crying, being afraid. Properties of the bunny lead to a conditioned stimulus, the sound paired with the properties of the bunny, the morphological properties of the bunny, can become the conditioned stimulus, which lead to an internal state in my head, which leads to eventually an output, a performance output, possibly mediated by a representation. The representation being that there is a bunny and bunnies are scary. Something of that sort. If we think that little Albert would be right in responding to the scary sound, the honk, by thinking there is something scary or something dangerous here, now we've taken that sound away, we only have the bunny, and now little Albert is falsely representing the bunny as something dangerous. So goes the story. And so we have a case here of misrepresentation. Little Albert misrepresents the bunny as scary. We might think there are problems with this story all around. But this is one way we can get to misrepresentation, so says Dretsky. And the point of all this is that, well, since in order to account for misrepresentation, we had to appeal to learning, a learning process, and this process was partially external. It had to do with conditioning schedules, and misrepresentation is a part of representation, namely when we get representation wrong. Any theory that's going to appeal to, give an account of mental representation, semantics, meaning, how we come to have meaning by way of our representations, has to be externalist, has to take into account things in the world. It's not that there is a homunculus, a little person in our head. Rather, the meaning comes from not just us, but partially externally. And so this is an externalist theory of meaning acquisition, of where the meaning we apply to our mental representations come from. And it's not a full account, right? It's not telling us, and this is how we get meaning into our mental representations. Rather, it's saying that whatever theory we give of mental representation is going to have to appeal to the external world. Otherwise, it can't account for misrepresentation. If we can't account for misrepresentation, we can't account for representation. So no theory that isn't purely internalistic could give a naturalized account of meaning. It would have to take on something like a homunculus. Fodor's account, so says Dretske, though not explicitly, is a homunculus account. There's no way to get just from symbols to meaning. There's no way to account for misrepresentation. Fodor's account would say that naturally the syntactic properties of our representational system, the language of thought, naturally have meaning. Dretske says, well, no account of natural meaning can account for misrepresentation, so no account that's purely syntactical is going to give us semantics, is going to be able to explain how we get meaning to our representations. And again, I want to say that the R here is a proxy. It stands for something. It stands for whatever the medium of our representation is. We're not committal about what that is. Is that phenomenological? Is it qualitative? Is there an experience connected to it? Is it seeing a picture and that picture somehow means there is a thing in the world? Is it hearing sounds and those sounds somehow mean something about the world? Or is it purely a neural state? And that neural state somehow means there's something is happening in the world. Cummings comes in and challenges all of this, at least as far as being any sort of a theory of meaning. Now, Dretske has not so much said that I'm giving a theory of meaning. He said, I am telling you that a theory of meaning can't be purely internalistic. Otherwise, you'd have to appeal to something spooky, a homunculus, explicitly or implicitly. Now, a Cartesian substance dualist maybe could give an entirely internalist meaning of mental content. Someone like Fodor is in a tough situation. Now, there are problems with substance dualism. If you were to say, I'm going to be a substance dualist, I don't think these problems are real problems, I'm going to maintain substance dualism, then maybe you could give a purely internalist account of mental content, propositional content, how our representations have meaning. But you've already taken on something non-natural by taking on a dualist system that can't account for causal interaction. If we want to give a purely naturalistic account, this argument from Dretske is supposed to show that it can't be purely internalistic. Fodor wants to give an entirely naturalistic account. He says all there are syntax, there's rules about the symbols, whatever they are, in the head that delivers semantics. Fodor says no, there's not, because such a system, even if we could get some semantics from the syntax, could never account for misrepresentation when we get it wrong. Think again, if we have a little man in our head looking at the syntactical system that Fodor says the language of thought is, language of thought is just a series of circles, squares, triangles. The syntax says those are our only symbols, says that there are valid and invalid ways of combining them. Then we have a little man there watching the symbols scroll by and saying, well, the fact that a triangle followed a square and is followed by a circle means such and such. Something like that's going on. But in order to say that there could be misrepresentation, not only do we have the first spooky thing, that there's some sort of thing interpreting the syntax to give it meaning, but now this thing, this homunculus, or this theory that delivers semantics from syntax is problematic and gets things wrong. The little man has eyesight issues, took his glasses off and can't see the syntactical system correctly, and so gets the semantics wrong. You would have to have something like that to give an account of misrepresentation. Dresky's claiming that no such internalist account, no account that goes from syntax to semantics, could do it because such an account would have to appeal only to natural meaning. Rather, there are functionally acquired meanings. These meanings are acquired with our interaction with the world. And so any account of representation and how representations mean things must appeal to the world, must be externalist. We've set out a requirement for any natural account of propositional content and how propositional content has meaning. We've not yet given a theory of meaning. Now Cummings comes in and he says, well, look, but any such theory is very far from giving an account of meaning at all. And he says, look at all this process. This process is about input and output. There's a thing in the world, an F. It has certain features, morphological features, sound features. These lead to stimulations of us. Inputs lead to internal states. Skip this for now. Skip the R. These internal states, either directly or as mediated by the representation, lead to an output. Oh shit, an F. Or, oh shit, a fluffy bunny. We have an input, a thing in the world, features of that, input by way of stimulation, and an output, a performance output, oh shit, a fluffy bunny, oh shit, an F in the world, oh, there's something dangerous, etc. And Cummings is saying that the account, an account like Dresky's account, if we were to think that an account like that would give us an account of meaning, we're wrong, and the reason we're wrong is what we have given is a very tight circle. In this process that I laid out here, I had, let me clean up my board a little bit. I could have maybe used that. I have the thing in the world, the F. That thing had certain properties, F1, F2. Those led to stimulation, S1. Stimulation, S2, led to internal state, I1. Internal state, I2. And then that led, skipping, well, that is said, it led to a representation. The representation led to an output, oh shit, an F in the world, or running away, or crying, or withdrawing your hand. And now the question is, how does this R have meaning that plays a causal role in the input-output relationship? There's an input by way of the stimulation. There's the output. We can skip in good behaviorist fashion. Dresky was making a move to behaviorism. Let's just look at input-output. The input being the stimulus. The output being the performance. And now we're saying that, well, two things. There's an internal state that's playing a role here. That the output is a result of the internal state. The internal state is a result of the stimulation. Let's get rid of that in behaviorist fashion. But we're also talking about the representation. The meaning had by the mental thing in my head that represents the world. There's an input. There's the sound, the honking of the horn, the presence of the bunny. And then there is something in my head that says something. It says, oh, there's a scary thing in the world. I'm in danger. All of these things, these representations I have truth and falsity. They have meaning. They mean something. That meaning is supposed to play a causal role in producing an output. Running away, withdrawing your hand, cursing, and so on. And now, part of what we want in a theory of meaning is to explain, well, what is this meaning? How do the R's, whatever they are, get their meaning? And what is their causal role? They're supposed to have a causal role. And Cummings comes in and he says, well, all of this process, this whole diagram from the features of the thing in the world to the stimulations, to the internal state, to the meaning had by our representation, to the output, is supposed to give us a theory of the meaning of the representation. And you say, well, okay, well, R, why does R have the meaning it has? Make the functionalist move, which is what Dretski's doing with an appeal to behaviorism. He's given us a functionalist account of where we get mental content, meaningful mental content. And it said that this, not the theory Dretski gives, but a one that's functionalist built up from that, would say something like, well, R means what R means because of the role it plays in mediating input and output. This just is what the functionalist account of mind is, right? What is the mind? The mind or mental states are defined by their causal relationships with regards to input and output. Cummings talks about conceptual relationships, causal relationships, meaning relationships. All of these are the same sort of functionalist relationships. Functionalism says that, well, whatever R is, this functionalist account of meaning, our representations have the meaning they have because of the role they play mediating input and output. And you say, in this case, R means something like, oh shit, a fluffy bunny. Why does R mean, oh shit, a fluffy bunny? Because it goes from the input, the visual input of the fluffy bunny, to the production of the sentence, oh shit, a fluffy bunny. What does R mean? R just means it just is that role. But why does it have that role? Well, it has that role because of the stimulus input and the output relationship. It means what it means because of the functional relationships. The functional relationships are what they are because of what it means. And this is Cummings' concern. Cummings' concern is that what we've given is a very tight circle here. I've said that the causal relationships explain the meaning had by R, and the meaning had by R just are the causal relationships. And so I've explained nothing. I've given you a very tight circle. The common sort of move made, this is also the sort of Cartesian move, or very similar to the Cartesian move of moving to the pineal gland. Causation between mind and body happens at the pineal gland. What is the pineal gland? Pineal gland is the place where mind-body causation occurs. That's not an explanation. Famous example of this is there was a medical text at one point, and there was a question of why a drug, morphine, some drug caused you to be sleepy. And the explanation in the medical text was that it caused you to be sleepy because it has a dormitus virtuous. It has a sleep-inducing property. The drug makes you sleepy because it has a sleep-inducing property. Why does it have a sleep-inducing property? Because it makes you sleepy. I have not defined anything there. I've just stated the same thing again. Why does the R in my head, when I'm presented with a scary F in the world, mean there's a scary F in the world? Because the input-output relationships define R as meaning that. They define R as meaning that because of the input-output relationships. And so Cummings says, because of this tight circle, maybe we've made it look like we've given an account of the meaning of R, but we have not given an account of meaning of R. What we've given is a very tight circle and said that R means what it means because of the input-output relationships, and what R means is that there are certain input-output relationships. That's not an explanation of R at all, so what we ought to do is get rid of R. Get rid of it. It's not playing any role in everything that Dretski said. We can give an account of misrepresentation, of saying, oh, that bunny's scary, that bunny's dangerous when the bunny's not dangerous. We can account for saying these tubes are hot when they're not hot. There's one warm tube, one cold tube. We can account for all those things without any appeal to R at all, without any appeal to the mental representation. We have not explained the mental representation. And because we can give all of this story that Dretski gives without appeal to the R, we don't need to appeal to the R. We can give a complete account of the output of an individual given the input through behaviorism or what have you, without an appeal to R. And so what we have is just these certain features of the thing in the world. They lead to certain stimulations. These things lead to skipping even the internal state. Well, let's go ahead and put the internal states in, but they do lead to changes in my brain. Those things lead to output. These arrows here are causal arrows. I'm now indicating causal arrows. These horizontal arrows are causal arrows. The features of the thing F in the world cause sensations in me, which cause internal states in me, which cause output states in me. Now, there is an R, there is a mental representation, and this is what somehow related to, we say, the brain states. But then the question is, what is this relationship? The R somehow supervenes on the brain state, but look, there is no arrow here. This is not causing the output. Rather, when we have the features, they produce stimulus in us. When the stimulus produces internal states in us, we have, at that time, possibly, a mental representation R. The internal states lead to an output. These blue arrows are non-causal arrows. There's nothing going on there. What this is epiphenomenalism. And so Cummings' claim is that, at least at that point, if we try to give an account of mental representation and how mental representations have meaning and cause changes in our behavior, we can't do it by way of functionalism. A functionalist account of mental content and the meaning of mental representations is non-explanatory. And so, if you give a functionalist account of the meaning of mental content, you're committed by the strictures of science to epiphenomenalism, to say that the mental representation R, whatever meaning it has, is epiphenomenal. It is non-causal. It occurs, it co-occurs with internal states, it supervenes on those internal states, but the internal states are doing the causation, not the mental representation. And so maybe we have here a property dualism so that the R is epiphenomenal. Or maybe we have a return to identity theory. The R just is a different way of describing the internal representations. Since the R is a different way of describing the internal representations, the internal states, the R is the representation. That representation is a way of describing the internal brain state. But the internal brain states are what's doing the causation. There's just one thing there. The representation is a way of knowing the internal brain state. The internal brain state is doing the causation. There we have identity theory. Cummings says, if you give a functionalist account of mental content, because you can't explain how the mental content is causal, you make the mental content epiphenomenal. Which of our theories are consistent with epiphenomenalism? Token identity theory, type identity theory, and property dualism. Whether there's a difference, it seems that property idealism may be committed to, property dualism may be committed to identity theory, but identity theory is not committed to property dualism. Because we need not say that those are mental properties distinct from the physical properties, but rather ways of going about to know the physical properties. They're properties of us, not of the physical thing. But Cummings' argument, if you give a functionalist account of meaning, you fail to give an account of meaning. And so you've made mental representations epiphenomenal. And so you have to give, instead, an identity theory of meaning or a property dualist theory of meaning. And since Another of his claims is that a functionalist account of the nature of mind commits you to a functionalist account of mental content. Since the functionalist account of mental content fails, functionalist account of the nature of mind fails. And so initially we thought maybe we make a move to functionalism to get rid of these problems with identity theory, the two problems with identity theory being accounting for disjunctive properties or multi-realizability and accounting for the causal aspects of qualia. Functionalism, maybe it appeared so early on, now Cummings is saying functionalism cannot account for the causal properties of qualia. And so it seems that we ought to move back to identity theory depending on our stance of multi-realizability, disjunctive properties, whether we can underwrite nomological generalizations with disjunctive properties. We might think this to be a reason to move back to identity theory. I say back just because of the order we presented them in, the order they're presented in historically. Move back from functionalism to identity theory based on a problem, or we might take this to be showing us that functionalism really is not different than identity theory. Maybe it's a different way of describing the same thing. And so I tried to make clear this week's readings, what's going on in the Dresky, what's going on in the Cummings. Dresky wants to give a natural account of meaning, so we can't allow any sort of homunculus, whether it be God, whether it be a little man in Descartes' head, whether it be Fodor's spooky syntax. We can't give an account of misrepresentation by natural meaning if natural meaning is non-spooky. And so we need a functionalist or behaviorist account of how we get meaning. Both of these are externalist. And so no non-spooky, naturalized account of meaning is going to be able to be purely internalist. Cummings comes along and says, well, but look, in giving this functionalist account, you made the behaviorist move. This behaviorist move talks in terms of input-output. But the R, the mental representation, is not doing any work in this process. The behaviorist showed us this. And so you haven't given an account of R, mental content, and how that mental content has meaning, how that mental content has causal powers over our behavior. And so we're reduced to identity theory, or property dualism, or behaviorism. And so we wanted to give an account of the nature of mind. We start with dualism, we see problems, we move on to other theories. We seem to come up with a theory that's fairly satisfactory in functionalism. Then when we look in more detail at, okay, we want to know about the nature of mind, now let's look at a specific part of the nature of mind, mental content, where the meaning of mental content comes from. We see that functionalism can't really explain this. This is one of our criteria of science, and that's the criteria upon which we base our decision choice between one theory of mind and another theory of mind. Functionalism fails to explain. But if it fails to explain, then it cannot now claim that it does something identity theory doesn't, at least not in that area. And so there's a problem with functionalism. Either functionalism is not its own theory, it just is identity theory in different cloth, describes things a different way, or it is a different theory and there's a problem with that theory. In that case, we have to choose between the problem of disjunctive properties, which pushed us in the direction of functionalism, and the problem of not being able to account for the causal properties of mental phenomena, which seems now to push us back in the direction of identity theory. Because identity theory can say how mental processes, mental properties, mental representations are causal. They're causal because they just are internal brain processes. And we understand how brain processes can cause changes in my behavior. This still has not given us an account of meaning. Maybe we're committed at this point to say that if we're going to give a naturalist account of meaning, we have to consider meaning to be epiphenomenal, non-causal. That still does not say that we can give an account of how we get meaning, because even if the meaning's not playing a causal role, it does seem that the thoughts I have, the representations I have, do have a meaning, and we still need to explain how we get that meaning, possibly by saying, well, but these meanings don't play a causal role, and so we can do all of our input-output calculations. We can do our predictions about behavior. We can do our explanations about behavior based on a theory that does not make an appeal to the epiphenomenal representations. Okay, but interpersonally, there's still the fact that my mental representations seem to have meaning. That still needs to be explained, even if those meanings are not causally powerful in producing a change in my behavior. It seems that, two other things here. It seems like we have disjunctions all over the place. Because depending on what we cache the R out to be, or the internal state to be, that internal state is produced by way of stimulation. What stimulation? Is it that if a tiger roars loudly, that gives me a different internal state than if a tiger roars softly? Or is a tiger roar and a lion roar, do they produce different internal states? If there is one internal state for every given input, then what I have is token identity. But it doesn't seem likely that that's the case, and certainly that would cause a problem for nomological generalizations. Rather, it seems that there's a disjunctive thing in the world. Any number of different inputs can produce a brain state in me that's of the same type, that produces an output that says, oh crap, there's something scary. And so it seems that there are disjunctions all over the place. Presented with the rabbit has been paired with the horn, the rabbit's now scary to me, but the rabbit with floppy ears or standing up straight ears both seem to produce that in me. And so the external F, the properties of the F are the rabbit with ears standing up or the rabbit with floppy ears. There's a disjunct. That disjunct seems to produce in me the same response. Doesn't seem that we can get rid of disjunctions. It seems that this idea that the problem of disjuncts is a real problem for nomological generalizations is merely an idea. It's an ideal. Maybe we formulate the idea of laws of science that way, but no laws of science are really that way. And since no laws of science are really that way, disjunctions don't cause a real problem for nomological generalizations, except that it makes them difficult to formulate, but we knew that science was hard. And so the issue of disjuncts, multi-realizability, does not seem to be a real objection at all. That is controversial. All of this is controversial, but there are certainly those who hold that disjunctions cause a problem. I think it's because they have a very idealized conception of science. The other issue seems to be that even if we make the epiphenomenalist move and say that mental representations are not causal, it's still the case that the mental representations have, for me, a meaning. I can report on those meanings. And so it seems that there's still something to account for. If we're going to go the naturalist route, we can't make an appeal to just syntax. We can't make an appeal to just natural meaning, because if we do, we can't account for misrepresentations, times I get things wrong. And so there's a mystery. At what point in me, or in our evolutionary history, did we get the ability to account for or to have meaningful mental representations? It doesn't seem that the input in terms of syntax or the input in terms of the meanings had by things in the world, if there are such, can account for the meaning of my mental representations. It seems that the meaning of my mental representations are underdetermined by the input. There has to be something additional that determines the meaning of mental representations. And the question is, where does that thing come from? And this is a hard problem. In fact, it's the really hard problem occurring, according to Owen Flanagan, how to get meaning in a purely materialistic system, a naturalized system. it seems that there is something emergent going on. But then that, of course, is not an explanation. Now we have to account for what gives us the emergent property of the meaning of representations from the impoverished input of syntax and sensory inputs. At some point, I can see things in the world as having meaning because I have mental representations of those things in the world. At some previous point, I could not do that at birth, say. At some point in my development, I gained that ability. What allowed me to gain that ability? Maybe that's purely developmental, or maybe the processes, the things that allowed me to instill meaning in representations and therefore meaning in the world, the processes that allowed me to do that were derived evolutionarily. Nonetheless, at some point in our evolutionary history, we did not have that ability. Some point later, we did. And so the question is, at what point did those abilities emerge, and what allowed for that emergence? Just saying that they're emergent is not to give an explanation. We still need an account of where meaning comes from. Dredske says, and I think he does a better job than Putnam does, that meaning is not only in the head. It is not purely internalistic. It's externalistic also. It takes in some input from something external to the head, either our evolutionary past, our developmental past, the input of the world right here, right now. Cummings drives home the fact that a functionalist account is no account at all, and so we're pushed back in the direction of epiphenomenalism, and therefore we have to appeal to something like identity theory, property dualism, or behaviorism. And still we have not got an account of the meaning of mental representations. I'm going to post your second paper topics later today. Look them over as soon as you can. Get me any questions you might have.